What's up, metal and heavy music fans? I'm here with Chris, and we are going to rank the albums of Converge.
Round two, doing it over.
That's right. But yeah, it is weird having done this just 6 months ago, but that's why I stopped doing tier lists for bands that had not just released albums, because inevitably every time they would announce an album after I did it. But
And
here
I
we
was
are.
telling you for a while that you should just keep doing them because then we get new music, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I did the Poison the Well tier list. I still don't think we're getting a Poison the Well album. So, anyways, we should
Wishful
just
thinking.
yeah, we should just jump right in though. So obviously we've got a new album to add, which we will get to, but we'll just start from the top with
Yep.
Halo and a Haystack in 1994. So what are your thoughts on this one?
This is a really hard one to go back to. And what's funny is if you were a Converge newbie and you went on Spotify or Bandcamp, you wouldn't know this album existed. It's not on either of those
Yeah,
platforms. Neither
it's
is the
weird.
Caring and Killing comp, which had these songs too. So I don't know if they just didn't have the license or what. But yeah, and to me, it's like very raw, very early. It reminds me more of Bad Brains, Black Flag, other
Yeah.
Boston hardcore bands like Slapshot. And there's members that would go on to form the band Bane in here. And in some
Oh, I
ways, it
didn't know
almost
that.
sounds more like Proto Bane than Proto Converge to my ears. And I like it. Bannon's really rough form here. He's still kind of finding his style.
Yeah.
And for me, I'd say it's either a C or a D tier. If
Yeah.
there was a D tier Converge album, this would be it.
Yeah.
If it was any other band than Converge, this would probably be like a
Yeah.
B tier album for like another hardcore band. But given their discography, I would say either like
Yeah.
low C or a D, depending
Well,
on,
and
how you're
partially
gonna.
for that reason, I've modified the tier list so that it is SAB B minus C. I've just completely eliminated the D tier, but I still wanted to have that wiggle room. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, and that's the same place that I ranked it when I did mine a little while ago. But let's move into Petitioning the Empty Sky in 1996, which, by the way, I love the redone covers that they did for the reissues.
Oh
Like the
yeah, me
because the
too.
old covers are kind of like they're very like of their time, but Bannon just does such great artwork, and I love these two weird figures he's made for these two particular albums. But anyways, thoughts on Petitioning the Empty Sky?
And I will throw in the caveat real quick that I did not rewatch your tier list prior to making my
Good,
notes. So
good.
all rankings are just what my gut feeling was. So
That's what I
yeah,
wanted.
Petitioning an Empty Sky, man, what a difference those couple years are. It's like
Yeah,
almost a whole different band at that point, and there's more of the metallic sound. There's some technicality. It's still a lot of post-hardcore type stuff. There's still a lot of really weird Jacob Bannon moments here. Some work, some don't. Honestly, it's still a C tier for me. I'd say either a B minus or a C, and the reason for that is it's got that cool raw sound, it's got cool riffs, but I don't remember as much of it compared to all the other albums. It's kind of like I listen
yeah,
to it and I think, hey, this is great, but I don't remember specific songs that well.
yeah. I'd agree with that. I think I originally ranked it like one higher, but I kind of agree with what you're saying. I know that the fanboys are going to be angry about that though. Like cuz I hear a lot of love for especially this album and the next one. But let's be real, y'all. Like they got better than this. Come on. Like this is
There's like
within
the
context.
OG fan base and there's the later fan base, and it seems like if you got into the band in the mid to late 90s, you swear by these albums no matter what they've done since then. I haven't run into that with his other band fan bases to the same degree.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see. I didn't get too much hate on my original that I can recall, especially in comparison to some of the ones we've had this year. Oh man. But let's let's go to When Forever Comes Crashing in 1998. And again, I love this cover. Like this reissue cover is probably one of my favorite Converge covers actually, and actually has some more memorable songs on it too. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's funny because most of the opinion you see are people like petitioning more from the kind of OG fan base, but I think that's just
Yeah,
because the
it's just
original
weird.
record had such a weird production and it was super raw, super compressed. Like they've, if you look at their discography, this is the one they've redone the most. I think, They've kind
I
of
could believe
remixed
that.
it and redone it. It's definitely closer to what would lead into Jane Doe. I still think it's like a B minus for me, just because similar to Petitioning, the amount of like individual moments I can pick out are still less than the whole.
So which tier?
I would say like a B minus.
B minus. Yeah, that's where I put it too. I swear I have a copy of it, and I was grabbing them off the shelf, but I'm like, it's not here. So I don't know if I'm crazy and I thought I bought it and I didn't, but I swear that I have it. I have all the other ones past this
I have
one.
the
Yeah.
original, not the remastered, and
Oh,
it's
that's cool.
honestly, I think the reason people hate it is because the original mix.
Yeah, yeah, they definitely improved the sound without losing the edge too, because sometimes a reissue can totally just destroy an album, but
Yes.
not in this case. All right, but that brings us to the one of the big ones here, kind of the big one. So Jane Doe, 2001. Yeah, thoughts on this megalith of an album?
It's one of the ones I can, talk forever about, I feel like. And it's interesting revisiting these first three and then going to Jane Doe because you're like, how did they make this big of a leap in 3 years, right? There's so much polish and so much technicality, and there's so much more complex arrangements that you're like, yes, there were some band lineup changes in between When Forever Comes Crashing and Jane Doe, but it's just so much further ahead. And the title track has always just brought up a ton of emotion in me. It's one of the few long
I'm getting
tracks
goosebumps just
from
thinking
like a
about it.
metalcore hardcore band that justifies the length. And so it has to be S tier, right? Because it's so
Yeah.
influential. And again, I can just listen to it over and over now. And we're at 20 years now and it hasn't aged a bit.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I do come across people saying that it's kind of like overrated, and in some degrees, I can kind of understand that because people have just like talked it to death. And I'd argue that like some of their later albums are even stronger albums than this one, but for the influence, for the legacy, for the bar it set at the time, like there's a reason why there's so many hipsters walking around with this tattooed on their body, and
Yep.
it's it's a thing for a reason, and so many great songs like from across the board too, because you've got those more kind of atmospheric tracks, but then you also just have straight wreckers. Concubine is honestly like one of the best album openers probably of all time. um Jacob
I
just
would agree with that.
rips so hard into it, and I mean, Fault and Fracture, and the Broken Vow, Homewrecker is just like an annihilator. Amazing album, S tier for sure. All right, You Fail Me, 2004. So how do you follow up an absolute classic?
You do it better, I think. I honestly think I wouldn't say this is a huge leap, but it's an iterative leap. The opening of First Light, Last Light is such a
Yes.
powerful opening. I think
Dude, I'm
I
getting
think
goosebumps
Concubine
again.
is
Like,
stronger,
even just you mentioning that, anytime somebody literally says first light, last light, I get physical goosebumps. Like, that's how strong that 1-2
right?
punch of the beginning is. Oh my God. But yeah, go
I
ahead.
honestly think this is the most metallic they've ever sounded. If you think of like the guitar tone here and the squeals that sound like a freight train, and I think this is probably the darkest and most metallic they've gone because they explored so many other styles afterwards. And even like the drums on the title track have this like machine like precision, almost like a bit of an industrial vibe to them. There's, little bits like that that help to uh, differentiate it. And then you have like In Her Shadow, which shows that they can do a full clean song, because Jane Doe was still kind of very heavy with those later moments. Here they're like, all right, well, how do we follow that up? We just go full
Yeah,
clean for a little bit, and it works.
it's
There's parts that
haunting.
remind me a little bit of Every Time I Die. Eagles Become Vultures has that like Every Time I Die twang to it. So there's, I'd say, more variety than Jane Doe, and that's kind of what makes it better for me.
Yeah, which kind of makes sense because Jane Doe is a little bit more like direct conceptual. It's all centering around kind of one particular event, whereas this has a little bit more freedom. But yeah, it's just like, again, I know I already said it, but haunting like is the word that comes to mind. I think this album art too like perfectly captures
Yes.
kind of the vibe of the entire thing. So where are we gonna put it? I know where I want to put it.
I want to put it at the very top, personally.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Another S tier album. All right, let's go on to No Heroes in 2006. And I'll say, like, I did not like this album when it first came out. Like, I
Me too.
legit disliked it for a long time. But that has changed a lot over the years. And now I go back and I listen to it, and it's one of those things where I'm just like, what was wrong with my brain back then? Because now I love it, like almost every song too. And I just don't understand. Like it was just one of those things that like had to like click over for some reason. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this one?
So I was the exact same as you. This was the first Converge record I ever bought. I got into them around this time because I saw them on Sounds of the Underground, and I remember buying it and just kind of thinking, "Ah, it's okay." You know, I
Yeah,
think it's because the entire first couple of songs are all very straightforward compared to the two albums before it. It's like straight up just all ragers all across. And there's still a lot going on. You can tell there's time signature changes and crazy technical riffs, but it doesn't really pick up for me until a little bit later. I would say, like Plagues is really strong. I kind of felt like Grim Heart Black Rose was a little bit too long. Like they were trying to redo In Her Shadow, like part two, and it didn't
I
click
could
with
sort
me
of see
quite
that.
as well. Here's a funny anecdote about this. I always hear on the title track when it gets into the later part of the song that he's screaming the South Park theme song. Like he's screaming, ample parking day or night. And you can't unhear it once you do that. I put
Oh,
it
that's
as a
great.
B minus because
Oh,
I
okay.
think the second half stands out really strong to me, but I didn't feel like the pacing was as good. I felt like the first four songs
I
go by in a whirlwind. I don't remember much about them, even though I liked them. And then it kind of, Grimheart Black Rose combination, the pacing to me kind of suffers a little bit compared to like You Fail Me and Jane Doe.
yeah. I could kind of see that. It is an interesting album because every time I put it on, I'm like, this whole thing slaps. But even now, like, despite how many times I've listened to it looking at the track listing, my brain doesn't conjure up the same immediate, like, what riff is that? How does that song sound that, like, the other albums do? And I don't know what that is. Would you say it's better or not as good as When Forever?
I would say it's better personally.
Okay.
I think it has more of an identity there, and that's the difference.
So that brings us to Axe to Fall. And I vividly remember the lead up to this album where the first thing they did was they dropped like just like a I want to say like a 20-second like teaser, just like a camera on the drum set, I think, of them just raging through. I can't remember if it was the title track or maybe Dark Horse.
Dark Horse, I think,
Um
was the first single, so it could have been.
yeah, and so they just played this like 20-second clip of that insane riff and the drumming pattern of that, and that was all they gave you. And they didn't say anything else, and I was like, holy shit. Like this sounds
Yep.
fucking amazing. And so I've noticed that speaking of Dark Horse, like this is kind of seems like a dark horse of their discography and that some people rank it lower, but I really enjoy it and talk about diversity. Like there's a lot of different stuff going on here. I do think it's a little bloated, but I think it's a really solid album. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it.
So I would put it as like my third favorite Converge album, but I wouldn't put it in S tier. So
So
I
like
always
A.
consider this to be the Converge and Friends album because that's how they marketed it, right?
Yeah, that is true.
All the
There's a bunch of
announcements were
guest
like, "Hey,
stuff.
it's got Mookie from Genghis Tron and it's got Steve Von Till," and you're like, "Cool," but I agree that it's got so much diversity and they're trying so much more stuff. Like they go like Doom Sludge on like Worms Will
Yeah.
Feed, Rats Will Feast. The ending track is like kind of shoegazy and like spaced out and sprawling. I think the reason it's not S tier for me is what you just said, that it does feel a little bit bloated. I think towards the end when they're stretching out the song lengths, it doesn't quite do it for me. But having revisited again this past week, I still think it's my third favorite Converge
Yeah.
album, which
It's
is
got
surprising.
yeah. It's got some of my favorite songs on it. Like it just rips really hard in some places and yeah, those sludgy parts kind of like took me a minute to get into originally, but now I'm like it's perfect. Like the guitar tone on those with that just like buzz saw like HM2 kind of sound. It's just like like just like
Yep.
revving a fucking like chainsaw. It's so good. All right, now I'm really interested to talk about this next one. So we've got All We Love, We Leave Behind in 2012, and you told me I think that this is like your least listened album, or it had been, or you hadn't listened to it in a long time at
Yeah,
least.
up until this week, I was kind of in a bit of a
Oh, that's
huff
right.
and
You
boycott
you
because of the deluxe
boycotted it.
edition versus the regular when it came out.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear then, like, what are your thoughts now that you've gone back and you've taken the dive?
I like it, but I don't. Like,
What?
it's, don't get me wrong, there's a lot
Oh
of
my
good
god.
individual songs, but again, it just doesn't all stand out to me. I think the biggest difference I notice is that there's more of a rock and roll feel to it, right? Like Axe to Fall
Hmm.
started to do some of that. There's more like punk and rock and roll here. They went more stripped down. There weren't any guests on this one. It's kind of like No Heroes in that the first handful of songs until it gets to Glacial Pace are very straightforward and kind of ragers again. I really, really like Cora Blue. I think Cora Blue is one of my favorite songs of theirs, but the rest of it doesn't quite reach that for me. I'd say it's a B tier above No Heroes for me. So I'd still put it in
Okay.
B tier, but I see a lot of people say, and maybe it's just because they came into the band recently, like this is the best Converge album, and I don't hear that personally.
It's it's one of my favorites. Honestly, I like it a little bit better than Axe to Fall. Um, Aimless Arrow is just such an amazing opener. Trespasses. I also love the production on this. Like, it's got this like coldness to it.
Yep.
I feel like it's interesting. Like I feel chilled when I'm listening to it, and not in the good like I'm chill. Like no, I'm like literally cold when I'm listening to this thing. And
I
so
think that's
yeah,
probably the
I
biggest
think
place where we differ.
yeah, I think I put it at A tier originally, but I'll take it. I mean, that's why we get two different lists too, two different perspectives. And then that brings us to The Dusk in Us in 2017 with the shiny reflective cover. Um, I have a lot of thoughts on this album. What are your thoughts on it?
I love it. I didn't listen to it as much when it first came out because I think I was having trouble accepting that Converge in their mature old age was doing so much slower stuff. I kind of rebelled against that originally, and I think I've had that mindset on both The Dusk and Us and now Bloodmoon. Like you think of Converge and
Oh
you're
yeah,
thinking
we'll
of
get
all the
to that.
fast stuff, right? But they do it so well. Like I think it has one of the mellowest openers they've ever done to this point. It has a lot of really good riffs. Trigger goes like very noise rock, and it has that like almost pseudo rapped spoken section that
Yeah,
you like always think about. And then Thousands of Miles Between Us almost has like a Heartland Americana slant that like suits. It's almost like a teaser to what they ended up doing on Blood Moon this year, if you think about it.
yeah,
And
I can kind of see that.
I say it's like an A tier, honestly. Now I can't decide whether I put it before or after Axe to Fall. That's the hard part for me, but it's up there.
I think it's stronger overall as a complete work than Axe to Fall. But yeah, it is tough. And Converge is a band that like not only are they so technically proficient, and it's hard to do this because there are a lot of bands that are like super technical that I really enjoy, but they're kind of robotic, so you don't really like connect with the songs. And then I have other bands that are like not very technical, not even maybe great musicians, but they like touch my soul. Converge can do both, and it's like not easy to do that. And certain songs in particular, but the ones that always are top of mind for me, we already talked about, is that combo of First Light, Last Light, like
Yep.
always gets me. But then also a single tear on this album does the same thing for me. And this album came out at like the perfect time for me because I'm a dad, and so there's a lot of like fatherhood themes like kind of going through this whole album, and then also in the music video.
Because he was a recent father when this was written
I
too, right? Or something.
believe so is what I recall. And again, based on the music video, it's pretty clear that there's like a lot of that going into the song. And listening to the lyrics as a dad, maybe I'm just injecting like my own kind of thoughts into it, but I'm definitely hearing a lot of like things I can totally relate to at this point in my life. If I think if I'd heard that song maybe younger, I might not have connected to it as much, but as it stands, like it's become one of my favorites. This was another album that was a bit of a grower too, where I didn't love it when it first came out, and there were a couple songs on here where I was like, okay, I like kind of like half this album, but every time I listen to it, it just gets better and better.
And that's why I love that we did these re-listens for the tier list because this is one that I bought on Bandcamp when it came out, and I listened to it a handful of times. And then I'm like, when we were doing this, I was like, why didn't I listen to this back then? Was I just in a different space? Because this is awesome.
But now the main event here, and I'm still stuck on this one, to be honest. Like, I'm still not sure where to put Blood Moon. So 2021, Blood Moon 1, technically. I just like calling it Blood Moon. Until we have a Blood Moon 2, I'm just going to continue to call it Blood Moon. But I have a lot to say about this album, but I'm still not really sure where to put it, because we'll just start by saying this is barely a Converge album. Like, I wouldn't even really call it that.
There's like two or three songs that are really, really heavy, and that's
Yeah,
about it.
we both said independently too, which was funny because we didn't have the conversation, but I typed up like they should have just called this a different project. And then you messaged me like within a couple hours of me writing that same sentiment that maybe they should have just called this something else. Because for those of you out there watching who haven't listened to it yet, like prepare yourself that this is a good album, but it is not a Converge album.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I I don't even know where to begin. Like I've got a full review that will probably be up by the time this goes up that people can check out with my full thoughts, but like there's a lot of Brodsky vocals, which is cool cuz I like Brodsky. There's a lot of Chelsea just crooning. There's some like straight up like western vibe type songs where I described her, it sounded like she's like singing in like a old saloon, and
Yep.
also reminded me of like Quentin Tarantino movies. And there's a lot of like spacey kind of, I there was a song I compared to like Smashing Pumpkins in certain areas. It is, Jacob is like not even on it like a ton, I want to say. Like I guess he is, but he's not like the focal point.
He does
And
some singing, but it's not like Where Your Wounds, where he was doing just singing the whole way through.
yeah,
He's kind of like in and out, and like Brodsky takes over definitely a lot more than I would have expected. My first impression was that it was going to be like Jacob duetting with Chelsea for most of the album with his like clean approach that he's done with like Where Your Wounds and some of the Converge songs, but it's really not. It's kind of
yeah. It
all over the place in terms of that.
it almost feels more to me like this is the Stephen and Chelsea show, and they've got backing band Converge. Like that's part of the vibe I got. You don't feel the same way?
I mean, there's still a lot of Converge's DNA in there.
Yeah.
I think it's an S tier album, but within Converge's discography, it's like an S tier somewhere else. On
Yeah,
this
that's
list,
the
I don't
weird
know that
thing
it's
is
up
like
there
it
as an S
doesn't,
tier.
yeah, it's so hard cuz yeah, I kind of agree that like it's the other thing I said that is definitely true is this is the most ambitious, innovative, unique thing that they've ever done, and it works. I think it works. I do have some issues where I'm still kind of wondering how much I'll re-listen to it versus some of the other albums. And that's what's tricky too, is like right now I've put it side by side with Jane Doe and You Fail Me, which are just fundamentally different albums completely.
Yep.
So
See, I'm getting a lot of mileage out of it. I really love Failure Forever, which is like space rock, and
yeah,
like I
that's the
said,
one
it's.
I it reminds me of Smashing Pumpkins, like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness kind of era, softer song Pumpkins.
And see, I love all the singer-songwriters like Emma Ruth Rundle and Chelsea Wolfe and like Marissa Nadler. So this, for my taste, I think I'll get a lot of mileage out of it. But again, it's hard within the tier list, and I keep finding myself wondering like, what if they had done this and like a regular hardcore record and released them both at the same time? That would have
Oh,
been
and that's
nuts,
Blood
right?
Moon too.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the move. I don't know. I am curious to see what. Watch, we'll drop this video too, and they'll like announce part two for like within the next couple of months. It's like already done. Those bastards. I'm sure that's what'll happen.
And just because there was such a long gap between it, it makes you wonder like
Yeah,
what
it's
else is
fun.
out there. I do appreciate the amount of depth that she has in her vocals here though, because when she and Jacob are both kind of screaming at the top of their lungs at the end of the first song,
Oh yeah.
that hits so hard, and then it mellows out again. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah, it's Chelsea, and it's cool because like Chelsea doesn't scream a ton on this album, but when she does, she's the most terrifying thing in the room. Like
Yep.
it's like harrowing. Like even against like Jacob's famous for his like crazy dying bird scream, but she outdoes him on that song towards the end. I'm just like, holy shit. I'm scared now.
I really, really, really like it, even though my first thought was kind of like, I want normal Converge, but
Yeah.
then you kind of like open your brain to it a little bit, and you're
Yeah.
like, all right, let's treat it like something different because it is.
Yeah. Well, I was itching for something a little bit more unique this year too, and to be frank, my metalcore best of list for the year was already full enough, so I was more than happy to just not even put this in there and put it somewhere else because it's not a metalcore album. Like there's no way you can call it that. Like there's some of that in the DNA, but I could never just straight-faced call this a metalcore album. It is just
It's
far
like a
beyond
rock and
that.
roll album,
Yeah, with everything. Everything and the kitchen sink
like a rock
and
and roll with a little bit of Converge and a lot
yeah.
of Nick Cave.
Yeah. And the good news is, I mean, there is plenty of other quote unquote normal Converge to listen to, as you can see on the screen for the people watching right now. But let us know down in the comments, like, what did you think of Bloodmoon? Where do you think it ranks in the discography? Where would you rank all these other albums differently from ours? Let's have a conversation down there. You can check out my video of my prior tier list if you want to hear just my own musings from back then, and then I've got plenty of other like metalcore related content that y'all can check out. But I think that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus and Chris Dahlberg signing off. We will see you in the trenches.